The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Morning, this is Julia Talbot at the Department of Family and Support Services, and welcome to the Emergency Financial Assistance for Gender-Based Violence and Human Trafficking Survivors RFQ webinar. Today, I am joined by Maura McCauley, the Deputy of Homelessness and DV, and Adriana Camarda, who is the Manager or Director of the DV unit, Domestic Violence Unit. A few housekeeping memos. Due to the volume of participants, we put everybody on mute. Please submit your questions via the question box, and we will respond to them after going through the slides, although perhaps we might take a break in between the programmatic aspect of this presentation, as well as the more of the technical, how do you make the application kind of aspects of it. And then if you're having any technical issues, please use the question box to notify us so that we can help resolve them. Here's the agenda today. I'm going to turn this over to we're going to do the background. That will be Maura McCauley, and then I'm going to turn it over to her. And again, we're so excited that you are here and enjoying this wonderful day. Maura?
Okay, good morning. Julia, you can go to the next slide. So the Emergency Financial Assistance for Survivors of Gender-Based Violence and Human Trafficking RFP is part of the broader Chicago Recovery Plan. In our 2022 budget, a lot of really important initiatives and funding were allocated. This chart gives you a very high-level overview of those initiatives, but they range from affordable housing to mental health, violence prevention, homelessness, assistance to families, youth services, and other key initiatives. For more information about all of the other initiatives and opportunities, we encourage you to go to the website for the recovery plan, www.chicago.gov/recovery plan. All RFPs for other initiatives related to this plan are posted on this website. So in addition to getting updates on gender-based violence initiatives, we encourage you to go to that site as your central point to stay posted on what is coming available and new initiatives that are being rolled out. Next slide. So this initiative is part of the Chicago Strategic Plan to address gender-based violence and human trafficking. In 2021, Mayor Lightfoot announced the city's first strategic plan to address gender-based violence and human trafficking. It was developed with a significant amount of community input through listening sessions with stakeholders, an interagency working group that brought together about half of the city departments and sister agencies, a community survey, feedback from 2 dedicated mayoral advisory councils, and then another broader gender-based violence advisory council that was convened to receive input from community organizations, survivors, and key city departments and sister agencies. Next slide. So with that plan, in the Chicago Recovery Plan, we were very encouraged and excited that about $25 million has been dedicated specifically to gender-based violence initiatives in these 5 categories. So today we'll be talking about emergency financial assistance. We just released another RFP for rapid rehousing and supportive services. We have also recently released a legal services RFP, and then 2 initiatives coming up are for victim services for young people and for prevention and education. So those will be released sometime in the second quarter. Next slide. So traditionally, DFSS has funded domestic violence programming. And so this, this gender-based violence strategic plan and the funding to support really accelerating the impact that we can have across Chicago is really helping us expand from domestic violence, which is just one form of violence, to gender-based violence, which is an umbrella term for a range of different types of interpersonal violence, including but not limited to sexual harassment, sexual assault, domestic violence, sexual exploitation, and human trafficking. We know that all of these types of violence share similar dynamics of power and control, which increases the likelihood of multiple victimization a single person can experience. And one of the really key impacts of survivor victimization is lack of financial resources. Controlling, having someone control access to financial resources and their economic stability, which makes it harder to flee a situation or to maintain independence from the person who is causing harm. And so we know that the pandemic has only exacerbated this hardship for survivors and their families because of increased isolation and limiting their financial resource, which is just placing survivors at greater risk for harm, which is one of the reasons for this initiative. The goals of the financial assistance program are to provide a one-time $1,000 payment to approximately 4,600 survivors to mitigate that economic hardship. We are aiming to improve the financial health and well-being of survivor recipients. We are also striving to improve and promote the city's capacity to create and deliver an impactful anti-poverty program. And our goal is also to collect and evaluate aggregated data on survivors who participate in the program to inform program improvement and expansion of a model like this. This is one of several financial assistance pilots that the city is rolling out as part of the recovery plan. And at this point, I will turn it over to Adriana to go through the scope and the full RFP.
Thank you, Maura. This is Adriana from the Domestic Violence Division here at DFSS. Like Maura touched upon, the purpose of this RFP is really to increase survivor safety through a one-time financial benefit that will allow them to spend and use and whatever they choose to spend it on to ensure their safety. DFSS is seeking applicants that can manage the entire program from partnering or subcontracting with community-based organizations to conduct outreach to survivors, to gender-based survivors that have had greater barriers to accessing or engaging in services and are disproportionately impacted by gender-based violence. We know in the field that many of these survivors don't reach out for services because of their trauma. And so we're really seeking an applicant who can partner with community-based organizations to really do some outreach to engage victims to apply for these fundings or for these payments. And then we're also seeking the applicant who possess existing staff and technical infrastructure to really manage the program from the beginning to the end on a platform where survivors can apply and submit an application for funding and then administer payments to survivors. Maura also touched upon the focus population that we are really trying to help with this emergency financial assistance. So eligibility or basic eligibility for these payments are survivors or survivor households who are experiencing gender-based violence, such as domestic violence, human trafficking, and or sexual assault. This will be the basic overarching eligibility to qualify as a survivor to receive the one-time $1,000 payment. But within this eligibility, within the GBV survivors, we're also placing a priority that the survivor needs to either be a current Chicago resident or have fled a Chicago residence that was in one of the community areas most impacted by COVID. And we have attached to the RFP the Chicago COVID Vulnerability Index, and we are prioritizing survivors that come from the medium and high areas according to that index, who have been, as we said, disproportionately impacted by not only gender-based violence, but by the community area they are living in or have fled. We go over briefly the program requirements that we touched upon. The respondent needs to really design and manage a technical and legal process for application selection, eligibility, and administer payments. We also need an applicant who can design and plan for the outreach and communication to really engage survivors from these high and CCBI community areas. And the respondent also needs to manage and oversee the application process and compliance, and also to have a platform or a tool that can collect and deliver data for DFSS and the city, so that we can really learn from this process about GBV survivors who need this payment and how it's going to impact and improve their safety. Now we'll go over briefly some of the services that we provided in this RFP as it was laid out. As we touched upon again, we want the respondent to have a program management coordination experience to be able to design and manage the technology for this application selection and administering the payment. The respondent also has to have a communication plan available in multiple languages to engage the community areas and to engage GBV survivors living in the high and medium community areas. The respondent also has to manage the data collection and the payment disbursement activities that we require under this RFP, and provide participant communication throughout the process on their application and their status. And they would serve as a lead agency as well, subcontracted with community partners to really communicate and engage citizens of Chicago who are experiencing gender-based violence to apply. And then, of course, work with us to collect impactful program data that we can use after the program closes out. The second thing about the technology platform, you really need to design a process for applicant documentation and approval on this platform. The platform also needs to work with applicants on completing their documentation process. The platform also needs to invalidate duplicate or erroneous applications that are received. And we'll get into a little bit later on how many applications we anticipate receiving. We also need the platform to develop an alternative verification process for the survivor population. And we need to validate application eligibility from the high and CCBI community areas. We talked briefly about the outreach and engagement. The respondent needs to develop and execute an outreach plan. We also anticipate issuing out payments in multiple ways, at least more than one, and we will need to adjust our outreach of strategies as needed for the CCBI community areas. We would also like the respondent platform to support survivors' financial literacy and ongoing support and education about receiving the payment, and promote a positive experience for GBV survivors. And then finally, the payment and distribution management. We need the system to administer the one-time $1,000 payment to approximately 4,600 GBV survivors. We need the platform to be able to prioritize capacity to provide a no-fee online direct deposit or mail checks or prepaid debit cards. We also need the plan to create a system to safely and securely deliver payments to vulnerable survivors, meaning that the survivor receives a choice in how they receive this payment. We also need the platform to provide customer service for damaged and lost payments. We need the respondent to collaborate with DFSS on learning goals and lessons learned throughout this process. And we would also like the platform and the administration of payment for those debit cards to track and provide usage of those debit cards to gather aggregated statistics about how the funding is spent. The goals and the outcomes from this program, we also touched upon. We want the platform to gather the number of survivors reached through outreach efforts. We would like to know the percentage and the number of applications successfully submitted. We would like the platform to encourage applicants throughout the process of submitting their documentation and let them know and communicate every step along the way of their process, their application being processed. Then we also want to know the percentage and number of participants successfully enrolled and who have received their one-time payments. And finally, we would like to report or provide some feedback mechanism from the GBV survivor who was awarded a payment about their satisfaction for the process. And now in this presentation, we're going to go over the selection criteria, basically the scoring of applications, and where we feel respondents need to address parts of the application and the point equivalent they can earn on their application. So one of the criteria areas of 1 of 5 is community involvement. This is really where the respondent shows their capacity to subcontract with community-based organizations that have been serving GBV H2 survivors and specialize in serving community of survivors with greater barriers, specifically the CCDI high and medium areas. We also, in this part of the application, want the respondent to show their process for collecting and incorporating client feedback into the program model. The respondent also has to show their expertise in working with focus populations that we discussed and relevant capacity and infrastructure to serve this group. And the respondent needs to demonstrate a commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. And finally, we also talked about how the respondent's leadership reflects and engages the diverse people the community it serves. The next selection criteria and the highest point earning part of the application is the strength of proposed program. Here we want the respondent in their application to demonstrate their experiencing, implementing, and managing a platform of this size or a financial program of this size. The respondent also needs to propose a system and a tool that can support, we anticipate 10,000 applications from gender-based violence survivors. The respondent also has to propose a plan on how they can include subcontractors to communicate and conduct GBV outreach and engagement, especially in the community areas that we've identified. The respondent needs to also provide how they have the ability to administer these 4,600 payments to program participants, track their spending data if applicable, and provide a mechanism to collect customer service feedback. And then finally, the respondent needs to propose a plan on how they're going to implement the documentation application approval in the platform. The next selection criteria is organizational capacity, which is 20 points. This is where the plan or the applicant's application provides that they have qualified staff and partners or subcontractors to do the work. They have adequate systems and processes to monitor expenditures and fiscal controls in the organization. They can demonstrate the ability to manage and monitor the subcontractors that are doing community engagement work. And they have enough capacity, time to be higher, and we'll go over a little bit of the timeline of the contract as well. And then the 4 out of 5th selection criteria is performance management and outcomes, or 15 points. This is where the respondent and the applicant needs to demonstrate their evidence of past performance on some program that's similar to this, and that they have experience in providing services to the focus population, or they have partners who have experience in servicing the focus population. The respondent has a relevant system and process to track and report performance on this system and program. And the respondent has experience using data to inform and improve the services process. And then their application also demonstrates experience in collecting, storing, and protecting and analyzing data, especially for this sensitive population and the information that this portal will contain. And then finally, the 5th selection criteria is reasonable budget and justification for that budget. The respondent has to show they have the fiscal capacity to implement this program, and they have to show that their budget that they submit to DFSS is reasonable and able to do the entire proposed work in the scope of time. Just a reminder, the proposal itself should also have certain attachments. We encourage any respondent to support supporting documentation in the form of annual reports, studies, or other best practices materials that demonstrate why their application has a strong community engagement and strength. We also require that you attach resumes, certifications, or any other licensures for key staff that are overseeing this program or working on the program or in the budget. And then finally, please submit your the budget for this program, and we'll talk a little bit further in the next slides about how your budget needs to reflect the proposed plan. And here is the contract timeline, which we agree is aggressive. The RFP was released last week, March 30th. Applications are due by noon on April 26th. I can't stress noon on April 26th. And we anticipate starting the contract and awarding the contract and starting the contract on June 1st of this year. By June 1st, the selected awardee will be meeting with DFSS and the DB division to design and to begin implementing the program model on the program platform. And we anticipate the first payment disbursement to be on or before September 30th of this year. And then we'll get in a little bit about the contract process, but by December of 2022, that will be the end of the first contract year, and then you'll receive a renewal award or a renewal contract for 2023, ending on December 31st of 2023. Here's a little bit more information about your budget that should be submitted in part with your application. Like I said, the term of the contract begins June 1st of this year and goes through December 31st of 2023. That is your global contract, not your budget period, like we talked in the slide before. And after 2023, DFSS has an option to either extend for a year and up to 2 years. Extensions are based on the availability of funds and contractor performance. Under this RFP, DFSS anticipates funding only one administrator. However, there is no limit to the number of partners and subcontractors that are incorporated as part of your application. The total funding that this one administrator will receive or be awarded is $5 million that goes through all the way through December 31st of 2023. That's 2024 is a mistake in the PowerPoint presentation, and we will correct that. Again, that's $5 million contract will go through December 31st of 2023. Administrative costs are capped at $400,000 with the remaining funds to be passed through the survivors. That means that $4.6 million will go out for the $1,000 payments for the GB survivors. Please submit a budget for 12 months. Although we're saying that the contract will be awarded between June 1st and December 31st of 2023, please submit a 12-year budget with your application so we can gauge what your annual cost is. The cost category definitions that are in the budgets have instructions and what line items. Please follow those instructions. If you have questions on those budget line items, please reach out to us and let us know. In terms of your budget and your cost proposal, please be thoughtful and inclusive when you're developing your budget and apply for your actual costs, because we can award you what you ask for, but we can't award you more than you ask for those costs. And then please be reasonable about your cost questions and application, and please describe your cost line items in your application so that your application is completely clear. Here are some common things that most applicants get wrong on the budget and the cost proposal. We generally see that supplies are usually under budgeted or over budgeted, so be careful on the supply line. Supplies are an eligible activity under these funds. Make sure that all of your staff that you list on the application or on your budget and in your narratives match the job description titles and job descriptions in the budget you submit. Also put a brief description of the job in the budget document itself so we can correlate or the evaluator can correlate which job descriptions staff that you mentioned in your proposal is identified in your budget submission. And then finally, you put your budget in the appropriate column by following the instructions on what are the eligible costs under which lines of the budget. This RFP is a part of one of the many RFPs that the mayor's office and the city is releasing with ARP dollars. And this particular RFP is eligible for advanced costs on the awarded administrator. Advanced costs will be issued in accordance with the city's advancement payment policy. You must indicate whether you are exercising your option for the advance payment in your application. And finally, in the RFP, we have put as an attachment the advance mobilization payment form. However, the form is not required at the time of application. It's really for you as an applicant or a respondent to look at and review what the eligibility and the regulations are in terms of what the city's policy is for advanced costs. And then finally, I can't stress enough, and Julia will probably bring this up again. Applications for this RFP are due no later than noon on April 26th. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Julia to go over a little bit more about the iSupplier system and how to submit it.
Now we're going to, I would like to just take a moment to see if anybody has some questions, and then we're going to go and I'm going to talk about the remainder of this webinar will be my talking about how to actually make your physical application for this opportunity using the city's e-procurement iSupplier system. Just to kind of kick us off for that, though, if you have questions, please put them in the question box, and I'll be keeping an eye out for them while I talk to you about the timeline. So the timeline for this RFP is today we're having the pre-proposal webinar. It's April 5th, Pharrell's birthday. And tomorrow is going to be this. We would like to have anybody, if you'd like to have questions that would be wrapped up into an amendment, we would like you to try to submit those by basically 11:59 p.m. tomorrow, April 6th, which is not Pharrell's birthday. I don't know whose birthday it is. Applications are going to be due on April 26th at 12 o'clock noon. And I can't stress enough that we do not, the City of Chicago does not and is not capable of accepting late applications. So that's a really hard 12 o'clock noon. I will be talking to you in subsequent slides about how much I would really love to have everyone submit the day before, just so that they have all their things in and they don't have to worry about this deadline being at a hard 12 o'clock noon. The program period, as Adriana indicated in prior slides, will start Wednesday, June 1st. I don't know whose birthday that is. It's my brother-in-law's birthday, but he's not Pharrell. So anyways, application tips. If you've never done business with the City of Chicago, please, please, please register into iSupplier and get an iSupplier account. That is going to take a few days, and you need iSupplier to enter into an e-procurement system. The iSupplier is the thing that vendors and delegate agencies use to access e-procurement, which is where you go in to make applications and manage your RFP or your grants or your contracts, rather. But wait, I see that we have a question. I'm so excited. So thank you, Ms. Norton. The question is, when you say that applicants from priority areas must be prioritized, does that mean applicants from non-priority areas cannot be funded? Adriana, Maura?
This is Adriana. Thank you, Colleen. No, while we anticipate receiving 10,000 applications, that doesn't mean all 10,000 applications will be complete. We anticipate that some will be incomplete. Some applications may not meet the eligibility criteria. This is meeting income eligibility. So considering that, we will accept the application, knowing that we're going to have more applications than we can fund. We will take all of the eligible applications regardless of community area, as long as they meet the City of Chicago criteria and the GBV criteria, right? And then because we'll have more applications, we will probably implement a lottery process. And from that lottery process, that is how survivors will be funded. So in that GBV, survivors who are not from those priority areas may receive payments, if that makes sense.
I would just add, I think there's likely to be some sort of a waiting process, and all of these details need to be worked out in part of the implementation process. So applicants can apply from non-priority areas, but because we are also trying to prioritize those high and medium CCDI community areas, it's possible that in the planning process there is some form of waiting.
So does that mean we should plan for a deadline to collect all apps within a short period of time and then move on to the lottery and payment phase?
Yes, there will be different waves or phases for the application. So we do envision there would be an open application time period. It would close, and then the delegate would move on, would conduct the lottery and work on the payments. And then depending on how many were paid out, we would do another wave and another wave until the funds are expended.
And a follow-up question, how can we assure an applicant has not applied elsewhere, or will the city cross-reference?
That's a great question. I think we will have to take that one back and answer that in the amendment, if that's okay.
It says, is that a requirement?
I don't know for sure, so I want to take that back. I do know for most of our recovery funding, there is like a duplication of benefits. We have to ensure that there's not a duplication of benefits, but I don't know what applies here, so I'd like to take that back and we will respond to that.
It says, or is it just that folks can't get funding twice from this pot? Yeah.
We would be seeking to fund people one time from this pool of funding.
Oh, here we go. Is this application to be the lead administrator? If our organization has some participants who would qualify for the assistance, do we apply?
Yeah, this application is to apply to be the lead administrator. So this is not, if you have participants who would qualify, this would not be necessarily what you would apply for. But if you would like to, be contacted about potentially helping with outreach or just making sure that you're included as we roll out, there will be a lot of outreach, but just leave your organization name in the chat or the question box so we can just make sure to have the agency contact you.
And then can you talk more about tracking applicant spending if we provide them with debit cards? Did I understand that correctly?
In the regular cash assistance program, an applicant who receives a debit card, that debit card, those transactions can be tracked. So what we're seeking is a lead administrator that may or may not provide us data on how those debit cards and where those debit cards were used aggregatedly, not on a victim individual basis. But again, that may be worked out during the implementation of the policy phase.
And with that, it's really critical then that the lead applicant has the appropriate confidentiality and safety measures in place as well as part of that process.
At this point, and if not, I'll go back to the scintillating world of e-procurement. Oh, here we go. Will we get the PowerPoint with the amended questions? Yes. The PowerPoint and a recording of this webinar will be posted to the DFSS website probably within the next 24 to 48 hours. And so that's where those things will live. The amended questions will be posted into the e-procurement application for this RFP. I generally do not post the PowerPoint with the on e-procurement. It's at the DFSS website. So if there are no further questions, I'm going to get back to talking about making your applications, and then we can have time at the end of the presentation to also delve into anything about this RFP. So as I was saying, if you've never done business with the City of Chicago, you will need to register into iSupplier. That takes a few days. You fill out a form. DPS, the Department of Procurement Services, sends you a link, which, by the way, everything in e-procurement sort of goes into our spam, so it's very important that you get into the habit of checking your spam for things from e-procurement. We all do. And then you will be able to get into e-procurement to make your application. So other pro tip, review the RFP narratives and application questions closely. And remember, everything is interlocking or interwoven. The scope we develop, I know that the RFPs are sort of dense documents, but they do provide a lot of information, and they do inform you as to the direction that DFSS is taking on any given opportunity. So our scopes are designed, and then from the scopes, we develop application questions. And from the application questions and the scope, we sort of triangulate that with our selection criteria. And so if you have a question, when you're reading one of the application questions and you're having a question about sort of what direction or what angle to take, it's really in your best interest to look at that scope and to look at the selection criteria, because that will give you some guidance as to sort of the direction in which we are looking for. From our selection criteria, our evaluative instruments will come from those. Our evaluative instruments are not public documents, and so we do not make those public. We do not make prior copies of our evaluation documents public. Those are private, so that private documents to us, so that we can make the best and most make our best decisions, and kind of. But those are not documents that we typically let loose or let applicants review. Again, carefully review the selection criteria for all the reasons I just discussed, and then know that when you are writing your application in the e-procurement environment, there is a 4,000 character limit, and that includes punctuation and spaces. Each response is allotted 4,000 characters, which is about 2/3 of a single-spaced page. E-procurement will not tell you that you have exceeded your 4,000 character limit in a given response or quote value section. And so I really encourage people to do their responses in a Word document, some word processing document that will count for the characters for you, and then to cut and paste it back into e-procurement. Additionally, when you make the application, when you submit it, you can get a PDF of it, but you're not going to have access to that application or those fields any longer after you submit it. And so if you wanted to keep that language for a subsequent application, or just so that you know what you wrote, you really should keep another document offline. We have funded people, and we've had to send them back a copy of their application because they didn't have it, and so that's never a big deal in asking that question, right? Although totally understandable, and you wouldn't be the first, but who really wants to have that experience? Also, in e-procurement, do not use the back button on your browser. if you do that, it will eventually it will stop saving whatever you're doing, and then you will get an error message, and you'll have to re-log in. And when you re-log in, everything you've done will have been lost. I like to tell people start early, save often. That's kind of my e-procurement mantra. Just in terms of other things, you can submit your application and later amend it up until the due date in time. I tell people, please avoid the rush and possible mishaps by submitting early. So plan on your submission to taking 30 to 60 minutes. This isn't one of those like press send and go. I'll show you in subsequent slides. It's really like press send and 8 slides later, then you kind of go. Late applications will not be accepted. And then we do have any number of ways to provide you with technical assistance if you're running into problems with this application. I will, again, give you the lay of the land here. There's an e-procurement hotline, which is 312-744-4357 or 744-HELP. There are an email address. There are videos and other tutorials that you can do if you want to do work more independently or autonomously. You can call me, you can email me, I am happy to help. But the fact is that even though maybe hundreds of people are not submitting for this RFP, although I wouldn't mind hundreds of people submitting, there are lots and lots of applications, especially with this ARP money. The RFP landscape for the city, as you may have noticed, is quite full. And so we are all about helping you. We really want you to make your applications, but you need to give us time. And that might mean time for us to call you back because we're talking to somebody else. At this point, just in my department, our department alone, I have 1, 2, 3, 4. By the time this is due, I'll probably have 5 open applications. And that's just me. In the city itself, if I'm doing 5, health has many, there's lots of applications. And so you might not be able to get through to e-procurement immediately, or they might need to get back to you. So I want you to give yourself the time to get the assistance that you need to make an application. And that means trying to get stuff done early so that you have the time to get the support and that you don't basically miss your due date or deadline on that kind of a technicality. That would be my ask. Again, save often, submit early. Here are, if you are looking for more opportunities to apply for DFSS stuff, you can look under the alert section or the funding opportunities sections on the DFSS website. Each RFP has its own little page on the DFSS website, and that's where I'm going to be posting the PowerPoint and the link to this presentation. Again, if you want to email, if you were looking for customer support, you can call the helpline. You can email them at customersupport@cityofchicago.org. Or if you want to just look at training materials, they are on this. There's a link to that too, which is basically going to DPS and then the iSupplier page. And then you'll see online training materials. The ones that are going to be most relevant to you will be the ones under the delegate agency training materials. Now I'm going to go on and we're going to discuss 2 common experiences people have in interacting or interfacing with e-procurement. The first is going to be how to accept an amendment. DFSS, we do an amendment pretty much for every RFP, if for no other reason than to upload the answers to the questions that we received during the webinar and from people who ask questions via email or phone calls. So in this case, if you have started an application, you're going to need to accept the amendment, and the process of accepting the amendment will pull your work from the original RFP into the amended version of the RFP. And if you've not started an application, you will need to accept the amendment prior to being able to start. As you can see, you'll see in the next few slides, we are very interested in making sure that people understand that they are going to be held responsible for the content of the amended changes in the documents. So that, please read the amendment. They usually have interesting updates, or they might have answers to questions that you might might want to know. For instance, every question that we just went through will be part of the amendment, and all of the things that Adriana or Maura said they were going to need to look into further and get back to you on, the answers will be in the amendment. So there you go. That's a good reason to read it. So in this case, this is the screen you will see as part of like the beginning the accepting of the amendment process. If you want to look at the amendment history, you click on this blue View Amendment History, and that will take you to the amendment document. And then if you hadn't started an RFP, your application yet, you would go into this actions bar and go to create quote, and then you would click on go. And when you do that, you're going to be brought to this screen. And this is the screen where it's going to, it says to be considered for an award, you must acknowledge each amendment and submit, or it's not going to be resubmit. Submit all your responses to ensure they comply with the changes. So like basically if we said like, oh yeah, you gotta, I don't know, do everything in red font now, or red colored print. That is the kind, we don't put that in. We don't have things like that in our amendments. Our amendments are a little juicier than that, but that's why you want to read, because if we have an answer, one of these questions that is in conflict with the direction you were going, this is the time that you would read the amendment and be like, oh, I got to rewrite the answer to that question. If you want to review you'll see here on the right-hand side, number 1, to review the amended changes, you would click on the document number, or you could also click on the review changes, this little infinity or eyeglass icon, and then you're going to click the acknowledge amendments button. So when you click on the 1 or the 2, you're going to be brought to the amendment document itself to review. You can also see in the middle here under title, there's this amendment description that's just a little 1-page summary of what might be inside the amendment. Usually I just write like, these are the questions and answers from the webinar. But if there's something juicier, like we're changing the due date, I will put that in too, just to give people a heads up. Once you acknowledge the amendment, you're going to be brought to this screen where you're going to need to accept the terms of the conditions of the RFQ and also acknowledge the changes made to the RFQ amendment. And so you'll click this tiny little square, and then you will hit acknowledge on the right-hand side of the screen. And after that, you'll be brought to a confirmation page where you acknowledge successfully, and you can and then you can proceed. You would hit yes. I'm always curious as to what would happen if I hit no, but I imagine it would just take you back to the next screen, the prior screen. So you'll hit yes, and then that will take you to this final screen where you need to accept the terms and conditions of the RFP or RFQ, and then you'll hit accept on the upper or lower right-hand side. And that is how you accept the amendment. After that, you will be able to proceed, either continue to write your application or to start your application. Now I'm going to just go in very quickly to talk about how you submit the application. As I said, I really want people to consider doing this early. Try to do this the day before. Save yourself the stress of a submission. So when you're done, ready to submit rather, you're going to start by saving your draft one last time, and then you're going to click continue. When you click continue, eProcurement's going to kind of do a scan of your entire application, and then it's going to come up with error messages. And sometimes eProcurement, I don't really like the language that they use. It's basically, eProcurement's just like, hey, this is an error because we think this might be something that you didn't do right, or we think that, like you might have skipped this question. It's giving you the heads up. So don't be alarmed if you get more than one of these error messages when you hit continue. And this is what kind of takes some time. You need to go and resolve all the error messages. So we're going to talk about 2 of the most common error messages. The first would be you must quote on at least one line in the RFQ. Here's a close-up of that. And so in this case, one line, you'll see right below the RFQ, this little error, there is this tab that says lines. You would go in to the lines and you would put in placeholder numbers. The lines tab is something that gets used in the contracts phase, but we do not use it in the RFP phase. We require and ask that you submit a budget as an Excel document or a PDF document, whichever you prefer. And then the lines get they get pulled in or they get used later. That being said, the e-procurement system wants you to put some kind of number in there just to kind of as a placeholder. And so you can go in and put your favorite number, put the numbers off of your budget, whatever numbers you want, but you'll get that message unless you put some numbers in on the lines page. The second really common error is this error about an unanswered question. So it's the quote value, which is e-procurement speak for unanswered question. And it's for the requirement, which is your applications. So application questions are referred to as requirements. Each requirement has a unique name to it. In this case, the example is that the requirement first name was left blank. So you would go in, you would put in the first name, and then when the next time you ran the continue, you hit the continue button, that error would be taken. But the quote value is required for the requirement first name is, I find, to be a statement that doesn't really ring any bells with, like it doesn't, there's not a lot of context to go with that unless you spend a lot of time in e-procurement, so I like to try to explain. At this point, once your application is free from errors, you are ready to proceed and submit. And so at this point, clicking continue will put your application into this review and submit phase. So you won't have errors, you'll have the little free quote review and submit. And at that point, you should be able to just scroll all the way down through your application. It's sort of like a long scroll. You'll just keep scrolling and you'll be able to see all of your answers and do a last check. You'll be able to see what you've attached. You can make checks for that. And when you get down to the bottom of the page, you are going to provide a signature. So this is your electronic signature. Put in your name and then your title, and then click the box as the last step. If you put the box first, you're just going to get an error message about how you need to put your name and title first. And then you'll see I had to do a separate slide, but on the right-hand side over here, there's this submit button. You would click the submit button, and you would then see a confirmation screen. The e-procurement system will send an email to the email associated with the RFP that you submitted within 24 hours. Remember, that very well may likely be in your spam or junk folder, but it will send you. Also, if you want something a little bit more immediate and you see that confirmation, but you just can't quite believe it, do feel free to email or call me. I can see your submission really the second you hit submit. It just pops up and I can check for you. And I'm more than happy to provide you with a verbal or email confirmation of your submission if that makes you feel better. It's really the least I could do. And so that really concludes what I have to say about the e-procurement system. We're now going to open up the floor or the webinar for any other questions that you might have, either about e-procurement, how to make an application, or other substantive questions about the program model, or really anything else. So here we are. There we go. So here's a question. Do you have a sense of how many viable applicants you'll have for this RFP? I would have to say no. I don't. Perhaps Adriana or Maura, you have better sense on that.
No, I don't.
No, we have notified, we try to send the open period to as many delegates and vendors and community stakeholders that we can, and we encourage everybody to spread the word, but we can't really anticipate how many applications.
This is a new program for us. If we had done something like this before, I would have a better sense just because I would know who had applied last time. But since this is a new program and even like a new model, we are generally not in the habit, or we've not had the opportunity to do sort of more cash assistance kinds of activities. So this is really new territory. So are there any other questions? Are there any other comments that you would like to make, Maura or Adriana, about the program or the RFP?
No, there is another question about, can you talk a little bit more about what sort of demographic data would be required for us to collect? Well, in the application process, we will collect demographic data for the funder. These are ARP funds, so we need to collect just race and ethnicity data. That's maybe household size to determine income verification, and that's the extent. No more than we would for our delegate agencies. Maura, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think it would be consistent with our other domestic violence projects, and we would work through that with the delegate when we're starting up the program.
The next question is, can undocumented persons apply? I would say yes, if we're looking for an answer. The GBV survivor population we recognize has a significant population of undocumented persons, and they would be eligible to apply for the $1,000 payment.
And we can definitely send a check directly to the survivor, correct?
Yes, the $1,000 payment goes to the survivor directly. There are no third-party payments unless the survivor chooses a trustee of some sort to accept the payment for them because of their GBV situation. But unless the victim selects the entire payment to go to a trusted individual, the payment will go directly to the survivor, and they are allowed to do with that payment anything they choose. You're welcome, Colleen.
Thank you for asking all of these questions.
Questions can also be submitted to Julia and I after the presentation. They need to be submitted by tomorrow, close of business tomorrow, in order to be incorporated into the amendment. The questions can be sent to our attention.
I would say, generally speaking, it's best to send the questions to both of us, or if they're programmatic in nature, I'm really just going to forward them to Adriana. I will answer, I can answer your questions about I'm having a hard time getting into e-procurement, those kinds of things, but for a programmatic question, I am always going to defer to the program people. So, yeah, are there any further questions? This is when I start having like Ferris Bueller flashbacks. All right. Well, if that is all the questions that anybody has, then we're going to conclude this webinar. I cannot thank all of you enough for attending and learning about this great opportunity from the City of Chicago, and for your participation and your interest. Thanks to Maura and Adriana for doing such a great job in their presentations. And we really, really hope to see your applications. We're looking forward to reading them at noon on April 26th. Adriana, Maura, do you have any further comments?
No, thank you for everybody for participating in your questions.
I'm all set. Thank you.
Oh, fourth, have lovely days, and we look forward to reading your applications on 12/01, April 26th. Take care.